I'm Chris Farrell from the official GonnaGeek.com podcast, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other geeky podcasts over at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready, because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to episode 95 of Better Podcasting. Today we're going to discuss the differences between a podcast host and a podcast directory.
But before we get there, let's take a How I Saved My Podcast story from a listener. In this week's Better Podcasting download, you better get your sewing machine out because we got Stitcher changes.
And finally, in this week's Better Pod Back, we go over a ton of feedback that you guys have given us.
Lauren, start the show now.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to episode 95 of Better Podcasting. My name is Stephen John Drew, and with me, of course, is Stargate Pioneer.
Oh, how I have missed that electro pop beginning music. Oh, I'm so excited to be back in the studio recording an episode of Better Podcasting. We have a literal metric ton of stuff to go over. And Stephen, let's get with it because I'm getting so excited I'm tongue-tied.
You are tongue-tied, and that's better than having your wrist tied while you're trying to edit a podcast. That would be terrible.
I sense you are expressing some frustration from experience.
No, never. I don't edit podcasts at all, because why would you edit a podcast? Nobody needs to edit.
Edit. Yeah, there's never anything that goes wrong with a podcast that you wouldn't want to take out.
Never. But yes, we are here, and we are streaming this live as we do when we record at www.geeks.live. That's where we record and stream to. We are on our unusual date today. It is Friday that we're recording this. Usually, though, you can find us Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern time at www.geeks.live. That's where you can usually find us. However, sometimes in life, Canadians do get to go on vacation and take a week off, and they're not going to podcast lakeside, although they probably could have, but it would have been a very expensive data.
I don't know what your problem is. I've podcasted lakeside. Matter of fact, I podcasted on a boat. So there, take that.
Fine, fair enough. But yes, you can find us there as well. If you don't watch our video side of things and you would like to see what do the boys look like, you can go and check us out. We are on YouTube. It's youtube.com/GonnaGeek, or just go to betterpodcasting.com/95 where you'll find this episode. And hint, you can swap out 95 for another episode number.
Ooh, could you swap it out for 96?
Yes, but it won't go anywhere unless you're watching this in the future. But let's just go and move into what we like to solicit. That is a question for you of how have you saved your podcast? We've talked about it before. We are all about the group learning here on Better Podcasting. If you have expletive here things up, we want to know, how exactly have you saved your podcast? And so today, we actually have a story from a listener. Isn't that right, SP?
We do. We have a great story. It's Seth from Geekville Radio. Stephen, roll the tape.
All right.
Hello, Stephen and SP and all the Better Podcasting listeners. This is Seth, a.k.a. Zandrax from GeekvilleRadio.com, ClassicWrestlingMemories.com, and A1-Wrestling.com. And first off, I can tell you I learned the hard way that Stephen and SP are right, that it's best to have only 2 shows a week, but alas, that's another story for another time. But I'm here to tell you my story of how I saved my podcast. Now, spoiler alert, there's no Mission Impossible or Star Trek level of jury rigging involved to save my podcast. It's just what should be common podcasting sense. I was a panelist in one of my wrestling podcasts, which I usually record and edit. But, well, in this particular episode, my mixer/recorder crashed about halfway through, which would have meant doom for the latter half of the show. But thankfully, one of the other panelists, Jarrett, was recording on his end. And on top of that, the crash happened while we were taking a break. So all I had to do was take my recording of the first half, and through the magic of Audacity and mixing, I was able to make the second half of the show sound as close as I could to the first half. So the moral of the story to this, kids, and I'm trying to play Orko in the final segment of He-Man, or the last scene in G.I. Joe where one of the Joes tries to give advice or a lesson. The lesson is have more than one person record. That's the best way to have a backup. Because even if you have a hardware and software recorder on your end, there's still a potential for a problem on your side that would make the show unusable. So thank you, Stephen NSP, for letting me share my How I Save My Podcast story. And if I may, once again, geekvilleradio.com, classicwrestlingmemories.com, a1-wrestling.com. Please, folks, if you're getting into podcasting and you have at least 2 people recording on their end, you will thank yourself for doing that someday.
I have no idea what he's talking about piecing together one recording with another. I've never, ever done that in my life, ever, especially from individuals' tracks who realized halfway through the show that they weren't recording with their son.
Yeah, okay. So, bonus, I was able to get you a track, though. I had a recording going here locally, and but there was combined, the two of us, so I didn't have the separate for the first, 15 minutes or something like that. I fixed it, though. I fixed it. Seth, come on, man. No Star Trek technobabble. Oh, you're disappointing me. I like the technobabble. Go figure. I'm a rocket scientist. I like the technobabble. This is the lesson. The more you know, the G.I. Joe moment. Multiple recordings from, if you're recording over the internet from both sides, it's going to save you a lot of hassle someday. I still lament one of the very first podcasts that I guested on. It was Gallifrey Public Radio, the Doctor Who podcast on the GonnaGeek.com network. And I recorded, or we spoke to each other, I guess, over the internet for like an hour and a half, and it was the most amazing thing ever. And that conversation will never be heard by anyone. And Stephen, did you know that episode 3 of Legends podcast, also found on the GonnaGeek.com network, will never be heard by anybody for the same reason?
Yeah. It's really important to take a page from Seth's book because it has saved me on more than one occasion. I was joking about the fact that there was a time that SP had a problem with his recorder. He didn't hit record. But I've had it happen myself where something's just gone wrong on my end and I've had to retrieve somebody else's recorder. It's actually happened the reverse where SP's been recording on his end and he saved things. So yeah, this is great advice. If you can, whatever methods possible, get both hosts to record both sides. That's super important that you do that. And, just take a page from Seth's book.
Stephen, I'm feeling a little bit threatened. You're brandishing a phaser, a handheld phaser on the podcast here. So are you trying to threaten me to remind me to hit record on my H6? Is that what you're trying to do here?
I don't know, because if you're an audio listener, you don't get the reference, which is why you should watch the video show at betterpodcasting.com/95.
Seth brought up something, and I'm just going to mention it here. SP's Golden Rules of Hobby Podcasting. Rule number 3, there were no particular order, but rule number 3 was no more than 2 podcasts a week. Seth, buddy, get that under control, because if not, it's going to burn you out sooner rather than later. And if you want to hear more about that, go to betterpodcasting.com/50. That was the 50th episode.
I thought it was no more than 3.
Well, if you're talking to me right now, it's no more than 5, but
that's what I was just messing around with. But let's go ahead and move on into our main topic. Here we go. This is a fun one, and one that is being talked about today because guess what? We've seen a lot of questions about this subject. Isn't it right, SP?
We did. Matter of fact, we even got a question on our Facebook page, which Stephen showed me because I'm not on Facebook, by Matthew Ablon back on July 19th. He said, "Hi, folks. Love the show. What episode number covers the best spots to host a podcast, in your opinion? Or can you name a few offhand?" And online over the past couple of months, there's been a lot of talk about hosting or where to send your podcast to, where to distribute your podcast to. And I think in this conversation, especially with newer podcasters, there's been this misperception about what a podcast host or what a podcast directory is. So what we want to do is we want to set the record straight and tell you, our listener, what the differences is between a podcast host and a podcast directory. So we all know you need an RSS feed to podcasts, and that feed can be driven by your website. That feed can be driven by a podcast host, but basically you have this RSS feed, and that RSS feed is then given to directories. But that's the simple part of it, but we're going to get a little bit more in depth. So let's start with the easy one first, podcast directories. So what are podcast directories? There's what the consumer knows from podcasts. There's where you go to subscribe for your podcast. There's where you go to search for a podcast. And these are like iTunes, now called Apple Podcasts, although I have not seen Apple Podcasts actually stated anywhere in Apple. So we'll just leave that alone. Apple WWDC was a great one there. Yeah, okay. And Stitcher, which we'll talk about later in the show, Google Play Music, which has done a miserable job of promoting and making podcasts available, but it's still in the Google architecture. So for SEO purposes alone, and as we talked about before about RSS feeds showing up in searchability, you need to have your podcast in Google Play Music. And TuneIn, those are some big podcast directories. And where do you know what other podcast directories to go to or what the main ones are right now? Well, there's two places that I found, and we talked about them before on this podcast. One is podcast411.com/directories. That's Rob Walsh. He ran Podcast 411 for a long, long time. He's had a few episodes out lately, but mostly it's Today in iOS, and Libsyn's the feed that he's on. And he's been around. He's in the Podcasters Hall of Fame, and he's been around since the beginning, really. And then also Daniel J. Lewis has podcastplaces.com, and you can click, there's a GUI in the middle of the page that will click into podcast apps and directories. So you make sure your podcast is in those places, because that is what the consumer sees. Now, okay.
Think of it like a phone book, right? You know, back in the day, you had a phone book. That's what a podcast directory is it's a listing of all of the different phone numbers, RSS feeds of podcasts. So that's the best way to look at it. Now, that's quite different, however, than an actual media host, which is where you are hosting your podcast and essentially getting your RSS feed, aka your phone number.
That's right. You need your phone number. So how do you get your phone number? You create the RSS feed by either generating it on your own, on your website, like we discuss in betterpodcasting.com/65, or you host your file somewhere that can generate an RSS feed. Places that we would recommend that you could go do this are Libsyn, Podbean, Pinecast. Those places can generate an RSS feed. And why it's so important to go with somebody like that is you can generate a 301 redirect if you want to leave for whatever reason. Say you actually want to advertise with another podcast host somewhere that does dynamic ad insertion. You can go with them, but in order to do that, you have to put the 301 redirect in. Now, everybody that I've heard that has done this has gone right back to their original host. So I would not recommend leaving your host for another one.
But I'll give you another analogy for that one. Let's say you live in a house and now you move houses. Well, you might get mail forwarding services, so you continue to get your mail at the new place. That's what a 301 redirect is. Now, think about this. You have a phone book, which also likely has a list of addresses in there, as phone books used to do, I think, if they're still a thing. So somebody goes and they write you a good time, old-timey letter, snail mail, at the address within the phone book. Well, that goes to your old house. Now you have your redirect in your mail service forwarding to your new house. You're still getting your mail. This is how a redirect is important and plays into the podcast directory, because the directory itself is pointing to your old house and you are now not residing there anymore. So the 301 direct is going to shift you over. So it's really important to highlight the fact that if you are going to choose a host, make sure there is a way that you can redirect should you ever leave, because the last thing you want is all of these directories everywhere, all of these phone books pointing to the wrong place to reach you.
Yeah. So unlike a podcast directory, which right now are free for the most part, that might change eventually. I've actually postulated in this podcast over the last year and a half or so that somebody like Apple Podcasts could come and charge a fee to host your feed and make it available to the general public. That is not the case right now. I have not heard anything about that. It might eventually happen. So just take that for what it is. It's SP's prognostication eventually on the monetization of the industrialization of podcasting. But this sort of thing makes your podcast available to such devices as Google Play and Amazon Echo. If you do get a podcast host, or even if you pay for web hosting, you're going to be paying a set amount per year, per month. This payment is made to store the file, so they have to keep hard drive storage going. And it's not just you, it's other people that store stuff on there, as well as bandwidth that is used to download or stream your file to different podcast directories. So podcast hosts are paid. Podcast directories are free. That's a little difference. And in order to get into directories, you need a host. So you're going to have to pay for your podcast to be placed somewhere. Either you're self-hosting or you're paying a podcast host like the ones that I mentioned before. Now, some hosts, they give you a set amount of hours. So Spreaker's like that. I have a plan for unlimited RSS feeds. I can have a gazillion podcast RSS feeds on there, but I can only have up to 500 hours at the $20 a month plan. SoundCloud, I think, gave like 3 hours free, and then you had to start paying. But I would not recommend going to SoundCloud at all for any reason, because, well, I just don't think they're going to be available in another year. And Stephen has voiced his thoughts on that very much over the past few months. And I agree with him, by the way. SoundCloud's not, the podcasting arm of SoundCloud is not going to be the same a year from now as it is today. But basically what we're saying is you're going to have to pay for your podcast hosting. And that is fine. That is great. That makes it available for anybody at any time. And by the way, if you're choosing a podcast host, make sure if you do not want dynamic ads inserted in there, that you choose a host that doesn't do that. Like Libsyn doesn't do that, Podbean doesn't do that, Pinecast doesn't do it, unless you want them to. If you want them to and you get enough downloads, they'll throw it in there and they'll take a cut of the advertisement rate, but you will earn some money off of that.
So ultimately what you need to know is that the two of them work hand in hand, but you can't have one without the other, really. Well, I guess you could have... you could technically have a media host and not have a directory, but that would be a poor choice to make, because then your consumers are not going to find you.
your podcast is going nowhere at any time, at any place. Another thing to remember is if somebody finds your RSS feed, it is out available for the public. So you can't have a podcast just for your friends or just for your corporation, because that RSS feed is available through the host. So if somebody types it in, they're going to be able to find it and they're going to be able to download your show. So if you're working in a corporation, there's like, well, we just want this show available to our employees. An RSS feed is probably not the way to do that, because anybody with that link is going to be able to pull that show. And remember that once you end your show, and we talked a lot about this on Better Podcasting episode number 23, once you end your show, you have to decide what's going to happen with your show. Are you going to end it? Do you want it to continue to be out there? If so, if you stop paying that podcast will be gone. So you have to continue to pay. And it's another reason why I originally liked Libsyn so much is that when I pod faded a show like Voices of Defiance, I could throttle that back from the $20 a month plan to the $5 a month plan. And that podcast is still available and still gets downloads, by the way, every single month. So that is something that's available. And if you don't choose a podcast host that has variable plans like Libsyn does, you're going to have to pay that same amount over and over and over again. Like Podbean, for instance, you'll have to pay that same amount of like $10-12 a month for the duration of your show. So you have to learn that. And Stephen, let's talk about the other thing. You're not just putting the files on your podcast host, right?
Right, because you're going to back them up as well. Because again, none of these things that we've talked about is going to help you with that. So your media host may possibly have a backup, maybe not. But your podcast directory, again, your phone book isn't really backing it up because it's just keeping an idea of where they can find your files. So it's not actually helping you. So a lot of times I see podcasters make this huge mistake. They go and they're like, well, I don't need to back up. Look, I'm on iTunes. I'm everywhere. You can find me on all these places. But really, when you look at them, they're not actually holding your file. iTunes is the biggest one that I see people misunderstand that. They're like, well, iTunes has it. Well, no, they don't actually have it. No, they're pointing to your files. So keep that in mind. Back up your files because while some of these may technically, that's me making a sucking in sound, suck up your file, not all of them do. And, if they are sucking up your file, the odds are if you ever need to get it back, it's not the easiest thing in the world. We have encountered that before with a couple of shows that used to be on the network that were like, oh, I forgot to keep my archive. And then we couldn't find files anywhere. So keep that in mind that is something that you want to continue backing up your files. Now, while we're talking all about this stuff here, let's also remind you that it is important, even if you've got yourself a solid media host and you've got yourself splattered all over the internet with different directories, don't forget that there's also the promotion element. Now, we did talk a lot about promotion in episodes 32 through 34 of Better Podcasting, so check that out. But we just want to take this opportunity to bounce quickly down this rabbit hole a little bit with some changes and some best practices in addition to what we talked about there, because again, this whole subject today is because we're getting this question. So what might you want to do to promote yourself? Well, number one, Twitter has weirdly, in my opinion, in the last 6 to 12 months, seen an increase, at least our experience, with people finding us through Twitter. So don't be afraid to get on Twitter and try to blast out your show when you are publishing, because we've seen pretty good interaction on Twitter ourselves personally. And I've noticed some other really good podcast interactions on Twitter that I didn't see a year ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a better use of hashtags or a better use of Twitter clients, but yeah, there has been a reinvigoration of use of Twitter for promotion and for conversation back and forth. But make sure you're not using bots, right? You make sure you're not blasting out. Don't Twitter bomb, first of all. And second of all, if you throw a link out there 3-5 times a day, 10 times a day or something like that to different shows like your back archive, I can guarantee you that people are not going to want to see that. They might shut down the fact that they follow you. They might mute you if they have that available through their Twitter client. And more importantly, I think a little of that might be cheating because bots do click on those links. So that kind of increases your downloads, or has the possibility to, depending on who's doing your stats and what they count for and what they don't count for. And yeah, that's a little bit of an integrity thing for me. Now, if you're trying to make a buck, I can see you wanting to take advantage of everything out there. But the key thing there is that if you do put 5 to 10 links a day on your back catalog, some people won't want to see that and they will unfollow you. And that will be the direct opposite of the effect that you want to happen. So just take that in mind as well. Another thing that I've noticed, and I've actually found other podcasts from, is Reddit. Now, Reddit has a couple of subs. We talked about this before, podcasts with an S on it and podcasting. And they both have a weekly episode thread on there. I don't always take advantage of it myself just because I get too busy on Mondays. But if you post your show there, I guarantee you there's people that look at that. There's people that interact and say, ooh, I want to play this later, or man, I love this show and I found it from here. And I found a couple of shows through there. Hollywood Science is a great show that I found through there. And that's looking at the science behind Hollywood movies. And if you haven't heard that podcast yet, I would go check that out. I believe it's hollywoodscience.co.uk. It's a British show there. So Reddit is a great place that you can promote. And also there's another place that you can promote that I don't have access to.
It's called Facebook. Now, we won't really harp too much on this, but one of the things that we wanted to quickly touch on with Facebook compared to where it was when we talked about this before is I'm noticing a lot of increase in people utilizing the media integration part of Facebook to get eyes on there, because Facebook's always evolving. And a lot of people are now including enticing images. They're even uploading Facebook videos with just their static logo just to give people a quick taste of it. So that is one of the ways that people often are forgetting about really embracing. And again, no harm meant towards that or ill will meant towards SP. But the thing is, Facebook, you've got people who are sitting everywhere, just scrolling through their feed. And if you can just tease them a little bit and just encourage them a bit to check out your show, they will likely come on over. It's the same intention of those directories that we talked to. The directory is there so people can find you. Well, why not use Facebook the same way?
Yeah, and Clamor is gone. I used to love Clamor, which was a short little audio snippet, 24 seconds long on Twitter. Well, you can, through Auphonic, which is AUPHONIC, so auphonic.com, you can create what's known as an audiogram, which is a static image, and then a bit of audio. And it really is as short or as long as you want it, but you can post that on Twitter or Instagram. You can even put it on Facebook. And I think the different ones have different lengths that you can post on there, from a minute to 2 minutes. So just be conscious of that. And that's all the snippets that you want out there. You don't want to put a full episode out there through that. So social media is a great place, but there's also something that we've been looking at exploring right now too.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about email blasts before, but we've seen it's a bit of an old technology, but we're seeing an increase for us personally of people asking to have a mailing list so that when something comes out, they get an automatic email. In fact, I've seen some people who are in the money-making side of podcasting really embrace this again in recent with different avenues. So keep in mind, if you are lucky enough to build yourself a mailing list, you could possibly use this again a similar way as you would a directory. And it's going to be to put a little nugget out there that encourages people to click through and check out your show more. Now, mailing lists, it's really important to notice that a lot of them fall under anti-spam laws. So you want to, if you are using a mailing list, you want to make sure that you're using something that is proper, that, you know, actually is aware of the boxes that need to be checked so that you're not deemed spam. In Canada, we have very strict anti-spam laws that cover email. So if you're using a mailing list tool that does not meet the right criteria, potentially if I'm getting your junk, I could actually report you for a fine. As a Canadian, I could do that. So you want to be aware that that's a slippery slope in some regards, but again, so if you can encourage your potential listeners to click over to your show, who knows who they'll tell. The other thing as well that's really important about this is that I often see people forward it off. So they get an email from somebody that says, hey, got this new episode. And they go, oh, you know who I think might be interested in this? And they forward it off to a friend. Great way with that word of mouth referral thing.
Indeed. Now, something else, don't forget to cross promote with other podcasts if possible. I know #PodernFamily was working pretty good last year in that as well. If you find somebody else that you can consider a podcast running buddy, not bunny, you can build a promo swap with them. And make sure, by the way, that you keep that updated. So if you've done it a year or two ago and the script is still good, so that's good. But if you have changed your podcast, maybe some co-hosts aren't there anymore, you might want to update that and get it to the latest script. And of course, don't forget that you can join networks that are in the similar niches like GonnaGeek.com. It's actually a wide variety of shows that can go on there. And we're very fortunate to be part of GonnaGeek.com. So thank you, Stephen, for putting together that network again so all our shows could be on there. And that is something you can go out and search for different networks. Some you have to pay to be part of. Some they actually sell advertisements and share the advertisement load between all of them. And with Gonna Geek, we are simply doing it to cross promote our podcast. So that is important to note. Lots of ways to promote, but don't forget, you have podcast hosts and you have podcast directories. And the difference is podcast hosts is where you store your file. Podcast directories is your phone book. And by the way, I did get a phone book on my front porch while I was gone. so they still exist. So that is the difference between the two. And then after you've published your podcast, don't forget to promote it. Otherwise, nobody's going to find it.
So there you go. All of you who have asked, hopefully we have answered your question. If you have further questions, do reach out to us through any of the ways. You can find us at BetterPod on Twitter. You can find us at facebook.com/betterpodcasting or email podcast@betterpodcasting.com. If you got a question, we will definitely answer it on here or refer to the episodes where you can find it, or like today, do both. So let's go ahead and move into our download.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
Okay, sometimes in life there are notable companies that embrace podcasting, and they are out there and everybody talks about them, and their name is Stitcher. And then they go and they change some things which you need to know about if you pay attention to your Stitcher stats.
And even if you pay attention to your podcast hosting stats, you need to pay attention to this. So Stitcher on October 2nd, 2017 is changing the way that it accounts for statistics. They are removing the pinging behavior. A pinging behavior is basically something as little as 1 kilobit in data. Basically, you've just hit play and then you've either navigated away from the page or you've stopped it right away. You're like, oh, no, I don't want it. Or maybe you're in an app that auto plays. That is what a ping is. What Stitcher has decided to go to, though, is more of an international broadcast, or an IAB standard of 200 kilobits. And that is what they will call a hit for a download. Right, Stephen?
Yeah. Now, one other thing that you might want to remember is that, I don't know, somewhere in the podcasting world, I've heard about these things called podcast directories and podcast sites. Somewhere I heard them. And a lot of times what these directories and other websites do is they use the pinging method to make sure something's still valid. For example, iTunes will know whether or not your feed disappears. And if it disappears for long enough, you will be gone from iTunes. That they hit your feed, they ping it. They do pull information as well, so they do that. But a lot of different sites do use the pinging method to make sure something's there. So if they're just pinging like, oh, let's see if the file's there, and they do the ping and it's 1 kilobyte, what will end up happening is before with Stitcher, it would show as a hit. Well, we don't want that, because a ping that is just there to check to see if something's inexistent is just incorrect information.
Yeah, because nobody's going to listen to just 1 kilobit of a podcast. It's just not going to happen. So on October 2nd, Stitcher is going to be removing that behavior, and it will no longer be part of their front page impressions. They go on to describe that your provider metrics, like Libsyn, for instance, might be already filtering that out. And you might or might not see a change in your reported statistics from Stitcher in the future. So stay tuned, pay attention to your Stitcher sort of stats that are coming in, however you're receiving them. And if it goes dramatically down, you've got a lot of pings that have happened on your feed versus full-fledged listens. And that is going to impact your statistics overall. And don't forget, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, is going to start reporting with iOS 11 those in-app experiences for streaming as well. So you're going to see how long people are listening to your show. Stitcher has been doing this for quite some time, but other people are starting to do it as well. So given the IAB's 200 KB file retriever standard, we are possibly going to see some changes in Stitcher. And this is from their frequently asked questions, part of the email that we received here at Better Podcasting, because we also distribute to Stitcher. They said, quote, in the Stitcher Partner Portal, your download data will likely decrease as front page impressions will be reported as a separate metric. Data you view via your hosting provider varies greatly across providers and may include variables such as the popularity of your show on Stitcher, frequency with which episodes have historically appeared on the front page, and whether or not your hosting provider already filters out the 1 kilobyte pings. As a result, what you see in your own hosting provider may or may not change. And unfortunately, we at Stitcher do not have insight into that. So that is directly from their email, which they sent out. If you host or if you distribute to Stitcher, you likely will have received this as long as their email that they have on file is correct. And just pay attention to it, because if you're accounting, like if you're counting for advertisements and you have had a lot of pings, and all of a sudden, most of those pings go away, that could impact how much money you're able to get from each episode.
Yeah. So ultimately, what you need to know is that Stitcher is changing the way that they see hits versus plays and whatnot. And they are making sure to adopt what is called the IAB standard. And this is actually, in my opinion, a really good move, because the more standardization we can have with stats, the better it is. I have talked about it before. I've seen people who go, oh yeah, I have 1 billion downloads every episode. And you're like, no, you don't have 1 billion downloads per episode. Something's wrong. And it's just who or what they're using to get their metrics. I'll give you a real Stephen John Drew example here. Was back when I launched the Walking the Walking Dead podcast. I don't remember who it was, but we were using somebody. And what happened was, this was when, believe it or not, the official Apple Podcast app had just come out. This was a fairly new thing. I know, that's a long time ago. And what ended up happening was, for some reason, it had a problem with something that was in our RSS feed. I don't remember what the solution was, but it had a problem. And so our downloads were showing through the roof right away, which at the time, Walking Dead was pretty popular. So it was like, maybe yes, maybe no. But I stood back, I analyzed and realized that the app itself was trying to download the file, but couldn't get it. So then it was trying to download it again and couldn't get it. Every other app worked fine, but the original, or the Apple Podcasts app, actually had problems. And the stats that I used didn't realize and filter that out. And so then it was showing as a download. So there you go. There's a real example on how the stats at the time, this was many years ago, did not filter out these possible pings, and thus the high number.
Well, once again, it is something to pay attention to in your stats if you depend on Stitcher for the majority of your listeners. So thank you, Stitcher, for giving us that email and heads up on October 2nd, 2017, that will be changing. Stephen, I think we have a lot of feedback to talk about.
All right, let me put my sewing machine away. All right, we did have a lot of feedback this week, and it started off with
Johnny Pennington. Hey, Johnny, how you doing? I know you're listening to this. And on YouTube, he left us just a phenomenal comment. Let me go over it. He said, "These guys are the real deal. I love their show, both for information and for entertainment. They seem to have hit a happy medium between the two, which makes their show, in my eyes, just about perfect. I have just a few minutes ago viewed their first show again, Better Podcasting episode 001, The Topic. Their content is evergreen, so I recommend you start wherever in their series that is pertinent, and you will be informed and entertained. This is the show that discusses podcasting about podcasting. Listen to these two podcasting gurus and you are on your way." Wow. What a great review by Johnny. Thank you very much. I am floored.
Johnny, let me first off by saying sorry. Sorry that you went back and you listened to episode 1. No, there's good content in there. I actually recently had the chance to go and revisit the thumbnails for all of our videos on the YouTube channel, and seeing the early episodes, just I cringe seeing certain things. But yeah,
you know, I love that Sennheiser E935, but that compared to the Selector Voice RE320, there is a difference in proximity effect alone. So yeah, just listening to the episodes, there's a difference. We also got another YouTube comment from Dan Magoo about last week's episode. And he said, Magic's movie studio is awesome for all the reasons Stevens mentions and more. In fact, its biggest downside, for those who care, is only the uncoolness factor in that no one has heard of it. This may change as people begin to realize that, hey, it's really Vegas light. And not all that light, except that for whatever marketing or contractual reasons, they now reserve the word Vegas to only their top-of-the-line version. But Magic's, in fact, makes Vegas, as you said, and for most people, Movie Studio will do all that you'll need at a great price. I'm glad to hear somebody talking about it. Not an ad. I just use it and like it.
So thanks for commenting on that. It was nice to see another word of confidence for Magic's movie studio. Like I said, for all the reasons last week, I really like it. So if you got any questions about it, reach out. I've had a couple people reach out to me already. I was away last week. I am going to try to get those answers for you as soon as I can. So if you haven't heard back from me, just wait a little bit longer on that. We also had Zachary Webb on Twitter say, what kind of laptop is that? And that was responding to something that Stargate Pioneer had posted, which looks oddly familiar to something that I've posted many times.
Yes, it was my away gear, my hotel room podcast setup. And yes, I do have quite a beefy laptop. I was dismayed to learn that it's about 2 years old, but it is a 2-year-old 17-inch laptop. It's an HP Envy. It's got a 5th generation i7 mobile processor in that runs at 2.7 gigahertz. It's got a beefy video card in it for a laptop, a GeForce 940, which is a 2 gigabyte card. It had still does have 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. I did upgrade the hard drive, and upgrade is a dirty word to use because I went from 1 terabyte to 2 terabyte, but it's still the 54 RPM, so it runs slow on the startup. And if you want to know the model number, it's M7-NO11DX. It does have a DVD drive in it, which a lot of the newer laptops do not have in them, but I enjoy it. And I got the big 17 inches because on the road when I'm editing, I needed a bigger screen. So that is why I got that 17 inch. I will say, for a laptop that you're lugging around, literally lugging around the country or the world, it is heavy, it is big, and you need a special either suitcase or a backpack to have it, because not all of them will take a 17-inch laptop. So not for the faint of heart, only for the diehard podcasters it is used for. And it's just such a shame that when I'm on the road, oftentimes my internet speed is so low, because it does have some phenomenal capabilities to take advantage of.
We also had Josh Liston tweet us, and he said, get all over and into @BetterPod, the second most brutally honest pod about pod out there, behind the Podcaster's Survival Guide, of course.
Which is a podcast hosted by Josh Liston. It's a good show. Go check that out. And also he posted about a week later, just pick 3. Yeah, okay. @Dave Jackson, @Podcast Helper, which by the way, @Podcast Helper is Ray Ortega, and @BetterPod. So thank you for all the Twitter love in the past week, Josh. We really appreciate that.
We also had W. Scott Smith tweet us.
Scott said on August 26th, and the date is important here, he said, just wrote a strongly worded email to CNN complaining about the reporters being out in the hurricane. No microphone deserves that.
Oh, Scott, he certainly loves to talk about microphones and them getting damaged. So if you ever are wanting to do a mic drop, make sure you video the mic drop and tweet @WScottSmith19, because he loves the mic drops.
So in all seriousness, though, before we go on, Hurricane Harvey did hit the Houston area really hard. And as we record this, we actually have several people on our network that live in the Houston area. They're all okay, but I know not everybody is. And I know the damage is just starting to be known. So if you know a way to reach out and help a fellow Houston individual, go ahead and do it. They need lots of help right now. Getting back to Scott's tweets, he said, I saw a CNN reporter with a Sennheiser microphone, possibly a MD46. It looks like it had been sandblasted due to the hurricane, but it still worked.
That's awesome.
The awesomeness of the Sennheiser MD46.
We also had a tweet from Damien at Damien the DM. He said, since our format is free-flowing, we don't have any docs set up for hard plans. However, we use Discord app to plan sessions. This was in reference to a question I had asked last time.
Yep. A lot of people are using Discord. A lot of people are using Slack. A lot of people are using Google Docs. So yeah, there's a variety of different ways that people can collaborate in their planning for their podcast. Also, Cybercast at Cybercast on Twitter said, on your bit about editing software, I use Sony Vegas Pro 13 for audio, video, everything. I do graphics on After Effects. So Cybercast, it's living the Magic's love there, Magic/Vegas.
And finally, we did have the Brohio podcast say, noise insulation DIY. It kills all ambient noise and echo. And they tweeted us a photo, which you can go ahead and check out on Twitter by going to geeks.link/Brohio. That's BROHIO.
So what it is a carved out basketball, and they're using the insulation inside the basketball as sound deadening, with the microphone actually placed inside the basketball and then a giant pop filter over the basketball. So that's kind of an ingenious way to go about it. The one thing I will say, just make sure you clean out that microphone from time to time. You might get a little moisture in there, and also some of that foam might come off and get on the microphone. You just want to make sure you brush that off, clean that off, keep that microphone clean and dry, and it will last quite a while. So a lot of great feedback over the past week. Thank you, everybody, for reaching out to us. We really appreciate that. Both Stephen and I were on the road for at least part of it, and it was always great to look at my Better Pod Twitter feed and see somebody had tweeted us another great response. So thank you, everybody, for making my very busy life a lot happier in the past week.
And I really, really like Brohio's podcast post, because I'm just going to go ahead and get myself a giant basketball and live in there, because that's just going to all sorts of sound dampen my room.
I think that would work great for you. You know, you could place it over your head and then put some sort of mask with sound deadening over it. And just put a microphone. It doesn't matter what kind of microphone it is.
Does it help with mic bangs like the one you just did?
It would, because it would deaden the fact that you would be bouncing into walls all the time because you can't see where you're going.
If you want to get in touch with us, please do reach us through any of the ways. But go to betterpodcasting.com. You can always post there. You can find us at BetterPod on Twitter. Find us at facebook.com/betterpodcasting. And do please ask us any questions you have. We're always happy to answer them.
You know what, Stephen? We actually have one more piece of feedback.
Ooh.
It's a video piece of feedback.
Hey guys, it's Emily from The Story Behind, and I wanted to share a quick tip I got from Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast, and he actually tweeted this today, and I tried it, and it worked out really great. So if you only have one hand, or if you're trying to get somebody to subscribe to your podcast, and they're not quite in a place where they can use two hands to look through their phone and type in the name of your show. I know you want my phone, buddy. So if they're holding a baby like this, what you could tell them if they have an iPhone is to tell Siri to subscribe to a podcast. So listen to this. Subscribe to Better Podcasting.
Just to confirm, would you like to subscribe to the podcast Better Podcasting by Gun Geek Network?
Yes.
You are already subscribed to Better Podcasting.
Well, of course I am. So, wanted to give that quick tip. So, if anybody is out and about and they want to subscribe to a podcast they hear about, you could just tell Siri and it'll pop up in your Apple Podcast app. How easy is it to subscribe now? How great is that? Android users, I'm sorry, I don't know why it's so hard. But our Google Home upstairs does get podcasts. So if I say, okay, G word, listen to Better Podcasting podcast, it will start playing it. So just a really cool tip. And I will see you guys later. Bye. Can you say bye? No, he can't.
Okay, let's be totally honest here. If you did not gather, this was Emily Prokop from the Story Behind podcast, as well as recurring contributor here on Better Podcasting. It was Emily and her baby. I'm telling you, it was a video from Emily with her baby on her lap. If that does not get you to go to betterpodcasting.com/95 to watch the video, you are heartless.
It was so great. Cam was looking straight into the camera.
I know.
He's a born performer.
Yeah.
Emily, you are awesome having that. Oh, and by the way, I love the sippy cup on the table behind you. It
was awesome.
Yeah, as a parent, don't think I haven't run into those situations where you got to keep the pacifier or the sippy cup close by. This is important to note. Emily is telling us of a little tip that you can subscribe to podcasts on iOS 11. I guess it's still in beta right now. It hasn't released yet until the iPhone 8 comes out. It does not work. I tried it on iOS 10. So you have to be running the beta in order for it to work. But it isn't so important that you're going to be able to do this. Like she said, just subscribe to it verbally. Oh, the integration with Siri and Cortana and Alexa and all the virtual assistants. It's just so exciting for me to be living in the age of the Jetsons right now. And it's just becoming easier and easier to subscribe to podcasts. So really, if you inform your listener, there's no reason why they can't subscribe to Better Podcasting. Everybody, your listeners should be subscribing to Better Podcasting. Right, Stephen?
Yeah, that's fantastic. A really great tip for iOS users. And you should try to use that more often. Now, the thing that you want to be aware of is the part where it actually says, is this what you want to subscribe to? Because if you're using a fairly generic name for your podcast or the podcast you're searching for, there could be multiple results that come up. But with there, I was pretty impressed with Siri's pronunciation of Gonna Geek.
Yeah, I've been having success recently with Alexa in playing the Gonna Geek podcast. So we will hopefully have that, and I just activated mine, so I'm trying to quickly shut her off. So yeah, it's going to be awesome having this available as we go. And oh, by the way, Emily's learning how to video edit, so we're going to have more video segments from Emily from the Story Behind. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait for more stuff from Emily in the future. So with that tease, I'm going to be walking this one out, and we're going to be looking forward to next week's episode, which is indeed Better Podcasting, episode 96.
Which you can find in a couple of weeks at betterpodcasting.com/96, unless you're watching this episode in the future. But for episode number 95 of Better Podcasting, I'm Stephen John Drew. Only 5 more episodes till 100.
And I'm SP saying it's good to be back in the studio. And thanks for the shirt, Steven. Woo!
Looks good on you. Baby looks better, though, on the video side of things.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, definitely. Baby wins.
Bye.
See you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.